Welcome back, Guardians. Okay, so I tried this a couple of times already. I probably should. This is probably something that I should write out and make some liner notes for, some highlight notes for. But I'm just going to keep diving back into it because that's the style of these types of videos. So, crunch versus light. Specifically, I'm coming from a tabletop perspective in this, in regards to rules. Now, and also setting. A crunchy. When you call out something crunchy, you're calling it complex. It's got complexity to it. It's got a lot of rules to govern all the different aspects in it. Um, it's kind of like the difference between a hard magic system and a light and a soft magic system. Where the soft magic system would be something like the Force. You know, we just write in whatever it is we need it to do for the plot. Whereas a hard magic system has really defined rules. Uh, Vance, the author, from which Gary Gygax and his friends devised their magic system for D&D, drew upon this hard magic system. You had spells that required components and gestures and sounds to make happen. Your characters had to go out into the world and find these components or buy them from other sorcerers. Spells had to be learned from other sorcerers or tomes or scrolls. So that's a really hard magic system. In other words, that a lightning bolt is going to do what a lightning bolt does no matter where you go in the game world, whereas in a soft magic system, a lightning bolt could be made to dance around in a point of space, or a lightning bolt could travel along, could be made to travel along a conduit of some kind or power a particular device, would not just be used to cause 1d4 damage. So, in terms of the game rules, crunch versus light, I tend towards rules light systems. I like games where it's easy to pick up, set up, and get playing, and be done within about 45 minutes or so. This is in tabletop terms, and as well as video game terms. And it's not like, it's not like I don't enjoy a long, drawn-out game session. Back when I used to play D&D pretty regularly, game time still was only about an hour to 2 hours. It was most times just myself and one other friend, typically my brother. Uh, but it was like, we had to keep the sessions short because there was things like school and homework and chores and dinner and then playing outside, which was a thing for us. Who knew back then? Playing outside was fun. Uh, Playing outside right now is even fun. I just don't have a yard to do it in. Yeah, I'm like in my 50s, and I'd still like going outside and playing in the dirt and looking at ants. And yeah, I guess I've never got older than 12. Honestly, I'll just be brutal about that. I'm intellectually, I think I'm still evolving and progressing. Emotionally, I still think I'm progressing and stuff. But my interests in fun pretty much capped at 12, which I think should be a good thing, because it means that I'm not interested in all the other so-called adult enjoyment items out there. I don't drink. I have sake and I have some rum every now and then. I spike my soda on my punch, uh, but I don't really drink like a lot. In fact, my wife just picked up some sake for me, and it's a little jar here that's called Easy Cup by Morimoto. It's actually really good sake. It's kind of on the watery side, though. Anyway, that's a segue. Let's get back onto the topic at hand. I want to keep this short. I want to get the point across. So I don't like spending hours reading through hundreds of pages of rules and being forced to make sure I know all the rules or know all the playing pieces, because for me it bogs down my brain. It takes away the whole point of playing the adventure game, is to have the adventure. I have never considered myself to be a storyteller when I was a dungeon master or a game master. I was a I was a guide. I was the referee. I was the person who described the setting to you and then described what the reaction of the setting and the characters to you were. As a player, I wasn't a storyteller either. I was a character in this evolving narrative, this adventure. So even when I used to play, things like Warhammer 40,000 and Star Wars miniature battles and um, the WizKids, uh, I don't know what they're called now. It's been so long. but they're the little plastic models that you could build and then use as miniature combat. It was a very abstract game, by the way, too. It had your home field, a neutral field or contested zone, and then your enemy field, where you were trying to get to bomb their base and stuff. Uh, what was it called? Pocket Model. There we go. Star Wars Pocket Models and Pirates of the Caribbean and Pirates of the Spanish Main Pocket Model games. And I even had a rocket one too, a space, a kind of a Buck Rogers style one, Rocket Rangers kind of thing. Uh, and that got really fiddly. I don't like a lot of fiddly shit in my games. Miniatures and dice and rulers and maybe some blast templates is like the most that I ever like to put on a tabletop when I play miniature combat games. I don't like calling them war games either because see, Risk is a war game. Uh, Shogun is a war game, but 40K is not. It's a combat. It's a combat game. It's a tabletop combat game, miniatures combat game. Which is more of a mouthful than just saying war game, because I mean most people don't want to say facial tissue because that's like kind of cringy sounding. Most people just say Kleenex because it's more sterile and widely known. The thing is that crunch versus light. Light is something like Powered by the Apocalypse. You roll a 2d10s and a d6, or you roll 2d6, and a 4, 5, or 6 is a success, and a 1, 2, and 3 is a fail. And if you get 2 successes, that's a strong hit. If you get 1 success and 1 fail, that's a hit with consequences. And of course, if you get 2 misses, that's a full miss or a fail. In Ironsworn, they swap out the 2d6 for a d6 and 2d10s. Your d6 plus your attributes versus the roll of 2d10. And so difficulty in that sense is very wild. It's very swingy. There's no target number to hit other than what you roll on the d10s. So it's very possible for a character with a very low stat, like Iron for combat, okay? Iron is the stat in Ironsworn that you use to fight with. So you roll a d6 and you have a 1 in Iron. So you roll a d6 with a 1, that means that your range is anywhere from 2 to 7. And a d10 is a range anywhere from 1 to 10. So there's like this 45% chance of, really getting fucked. So wait, let's see. If you can go from 2, you want to be higher than the d10s. That's the rules. So, yeah, the d10 has 3 points over you. So yeah, there's like a 30% chance of failure on the raw percentages sides, but on the probability sides, you've got actually about a 50 to 60% chance of failure because your average roll on d6 is going to be a 3. So you're really only going to get like an average result of 4. So there you go. But the point being is that Ironsworn on the surface looks like it's complex, looks like it's crunchy because it has all these moves which are specific to particular actions that you could take in the game. But your character is not limited to just those moves. There are other actions you can take that may or may not fit within a particular move or may actually fit across several moves. And the game designer has said that, if your character is trying to do something that's not covered by a move, find the move that matches it, or just go with whatever makes sense. Because Ironsworn is at its core a player-facing game and a solo game, but you can play cooperatively with other people. So it's really a rules-light game because there's only one mechanic that defines success or failure for everything you do in the game. But it's diversified through all these different moves. That does not make the game crunchy. Crunchy is like having a specific rule and a set of modifiers for everything you do in the game. So in other words, in Dungeons & Dragons, you have rules for movement, rules for combat, rules for skill checks, rules for feats, rules for saving throws, rules for death saves, rules for, and then I'm saying that basic saving throws like save versus poison, fire, paralysis, all that stuff, and then the death save has its own separate rules. It really does. It's on the same mechanic. You roll high versus a target number, but you got to do a certain thing in addition to rolling that high. So D&D 5th edition has a little bit more crunch than, say, Ironsworn does, and it's got just the same diversity to it, but its complexity is still on the very light side of things. So there's a duality here that you're playing with all the time. Then you get into Pathfinder, which I have never actually played, but have seen played by, live play video streams, other people playing in clubs that I've listened in on, or just talking with people in general of when they talk about why Pathfinder is better than 5th edition or D&D in general. Pathfinder's in its 2nd edition, by the way, now. And then you have other people who play Traveller who say, oh, no, Traveller's better than all of that stuff. And can you do high fantasy magic in Traveller? Oh, yeah, there's psionics. It's basically magic. And again, you fall back into that whole, is it complexity, is it diversity, is it crunchy, or is it light? So I prefer a rules-light system where everybody's aware of all the playing pieces and what they can do. But yet I like a lot of diversity as well. I do like a lot of accuracy as well. So I don't have a problem using a point crawl map to represent a sector of space, let's say. Something really, really big, which would be almost impractical as hell to fucking represent at an actual scale. So a point crawl would be kind of like a subway map. You have the route, then you have all the different points where the subway train stops, and you might have like an estimated time between those points. Because when you're traveling, you're not really giving a shit too much about the distance. What you're really concerned about is the time it takes. Distance is irrelevant. It's all about the time it takes. For instance, traveling from one end of California to the other can take about 10 hours. If you're traveling from Central Valley to Southern California, it's about an 8 to 9 hour drive. 7 if you're reckless. But if you fly it, it's only about an hour. You see what I'm saying? So in an 8-hour drive, you've got to think about places to stop to take a piss or shit. You got to get food. If you're traveling with children, you got to try to keep them entertained. There's moments where you want to take breaks to let stretch out your legs so your shit doesn't go numb, so you're not accidentally just laying into the gas pedal or accidentally hitting the brake when you meant to hit the gas to change lanes. Yeah, all kinds of shit can happen when you're driving for that length of time. Whereas with your flying, you don't have to worry about anything. I mean, most flights will give you like a drink or a snack on the way. Flying is so much faster and more convenient, except for, having to go through TSA and waiting in the terminal and all that shit. And then if you have a crowded flight, then there's a higher chance of you getting a cold. Whereas if you're driving, you probably could still get a cold because you're wearing down your immune system by exhausting yourself for 9 hours on drive. You see what I'm saying here? So in a port call system, all you're really concerned about is the span of time that it takes from one point to the other. I have no problem with adventuring through a point crawl map, even at a dungeon level. Because when you think about it, when you're exploring the dungeon, especially if it's a dungeon you've already been through with your character, so you kind of know what rooms are what, some things might have changed in between the game. And again, that's not something that's dependent upon the crunchiness or lightness of the rules. That is something that the dungeon master or the GM, conveys through his narration of the scene, through his description of the events. So, you might be aware that, okay, this place was the kitchen. The kitchen was about 5 to 10 minutes away from the armory. So if I go to the kitchen, I have a faster route to the armory as opposed to going through the barracks, which takes me right to the armory, but is like full of monsters. You see what I'm saying? So in a rules complex or a rules crunchy system, there would be a rule to govern all that shit. And I have no interest in allowing all that crap. I don't want to have all that. I like a simple set of maybe 2-3 separate rules to govern the main things that happen in the game. If it's a miniatures combat game, that's going to be movement, shooting, and, morale checks. If you have a morale check, or some kind of command phase where you can, gain a modifier to something like that. For instance, during the movement phase, you can choose to have a trooper stay stationary so that they're readying their weapon for an attack, or they're going into Overwatch. You could also say well, I'm going to make sure that this unit here isn't moving and isn't shooting this turn. That means that they're going to have a +1 to their shoot, and they're going to be an Overwatch, which means they have a higher chance of sniping an opponent during their movement and firing phase. So it improves it leverages your odds towards success. So you have rules simple. That's a really light rule, and it's in lots of different games. But the complexity of its application is where you get the fun in the game for me. Games like chess and checkers. You might say that checkers is a rules light version of chess. or that chess is the crunchier version of checkers. But in fact, they are two totally different games. Uh, in chess, you have only the one win condition, which is, to force your opponent to concede. I've never been in a game where there was a stalemate. I have never played a game where it was just a king and where it was just two kings on the board. I've never had that happen. I have heard that it happens, but mostly amongst really, really inexperienced chess players who are really just kind of just doing it for the fuck of it. Whereas with checkers, you can draw the game to a stalemate or to a point where your opponent cannot make any more moves, where you can, um, and then or wipe them off the board completely. So, which of the two games is really crunchy? Which of the games is really light? Which ones would I prefer? I like them both because I see both of those games in the context of the grand scheme of everything I play as being very rules light. Risk is a crunchy game. That's why it's a war game. 40K is not a crunchy game. That's why it's just a combat miniatures game. I have not played Star Wars Legions, but I've seen all the little fiddly bits, and for me, fiddly bits makes a crunchy game. Too many resources to have to manage. I don't want to deal with that. I'm not here to balance books. I'm here to play games. I'm here to have fun, get into it, get it going. Why I play more video games than I play tabletop games? Because video games are not crunchy. Even games like Elder Scrolls Online or Skyrim, there's such complexity in the diversity of what you can do in the game with the skill trees and the constellations and the different materials that you can apply to make different types of armors and stuff like that. All that complexity does not lend itself to crunch. Crunch is in the mechanics. Crunch is in the rule sets that govern the environment that you're in and what you can do to it or within it. And if you're bogged down with all that crunch, are you really playing a game or are you just balancing books? So, for myself, I prefer rules light games. Destiny. Destiny is very rules light. Mobile Suit Battle Operation 2 is very rules light. Conan, believe it or not, is very rules light. There are just a handful of intuitive kind of mechanics that you get to know. Destiny has an opening campaign, if you will, A Guardian Rises, that I find to be tedious, boring, and completely non-engaging. Doing it once and you should be done. Elder Scrolls Online recognizes that tutorial missions for games where you can have multiple characters in the same environment, it is good to be able to skip the tutorials. Um, and so Elder Scrolls recognizes that. They value your player time. So they say, hey, you've already gone through a tutorial. You know how to play this game. It's obvious. Do you want to play through this opening chapter for this new setting? Or do you just want to get into the action? You're given the choice. Destiny really kind of doesn't do that. Technically, I can. Technically, I can pop into any one of these playlists. I don't need to go through a tutorial for that. So what Destiny does is they have you procking with this. Now, I haven't noticed it as much as before, but if I want... Well, I'm on my Hunter. My Titan, I just had the Arc one, though. But if I want his other classes opened... Oh, here we go. Let's just load my Titan up. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I have to go through all these different little campaign steps if I want to unlock my other two subclasses. There's no armor agnosticism. In Elder Scrolls, I can make a set of armor, and any one of my characters can wear it. Granted, you make your armor for a particular character class, like a sorcerer or a Nightblade or a Templar. Um, you have those abilities to do that. Um, but realistically, I could put the armor the Valken Scoria armor that my Nightblade wears. I could put on a Templar if I wanted to build a Templar. You could do that. In Conan Exiles, you can wear any armor at any level. You can wear armor that is craftable at level 60 on a level 1 character. It's not hard. In fact, a lot of clans, when they bring in new players, that's exactly what they do. It's called the starter kit. And again, there's a game right there, Conan Exiles. You can't run multiple characters on the same server unless you have multiple PlayStation accounts. But you can run multiple servers. You can have a character on every server available out there if you wanted to. There's an opening sequence you can skip, and then there are some journey steps that you can pursue to give you some in-game bonuses, but they're not necessary to play the game. In other words, you start off at level 1 and you progress. I've seen players get up to level 60 within a day. So again, the game's leveling process is really more about just making sure you understand what you're getting yourself into versus the zones you go into play. And that's perfectly fine. Again, Conan does not have a lot of complexity in it. It also doesn't have a lot of crunch in it. However, if you were to play the Conan board game, tabletop game, or role-playing game, it is kind of crunchy in my opinion. There's a lot of little mods and, modifiers to manipulate, and there's a lot of little perks and benefits that you can apply, and it's where you get the culture of min-maxers, is in crunchy games. It's kind of hard to min-max in a rules light system because the whole point of a rules light system is to allow you to be a superhero when the plot, fits it, as opposed to, putting you in peril and real risk of character death when the plot fits it, or when the narrative would benefit the best from it, because it's all about building the excitement of the adventure, and it's hard for me to feel that in a crunchy system. So that's it. That's kind of what I was tossing around in my head. Um, I have nothing against min-maxers. I'm doing the same thing myself right now with my character, my hunter. He's constantly farming for new armor to try to max out his mobility and his strength. I know everybody says discipline, but honestly, grenades are a joke for hunters. They really fucking are. Maybe on this Titan, I might go ahead and do that. But anyway, that's all I got to say. What's your opinion? Do you prefer a crunchy game or a light game? Do you like a hard system or a soft system when it comes to gunfire and magic and, the rules of the universe that you're playing in? Let me know. I'm asking for some actual viewer engagement right now, just out of curiosity. In the meantime, enjoy whatever it is you're playing, and